was the right thing, I suspect that deep down it was love that truly led him to make that decision. It, of course, is not the last time Joseph will be faced with monumental changes and the choice to resist or to participate. Later, after the Magi, the wise men, visit, and Herod makes his plans to murder all the young boys in Bethlehem so that there's no competition, Joseph has another dream and is given a warning. On one hand, it seems a bit absurd. The king, threatened by a mere infant? But once again, Joseph works with the change and takes Mary and Jesus and flees to safety in Egypt, despite the hardships of being a refugee. You see, what Joseph teaches us is really rather simple, and yet it is incredibly profound. Change happens, period. Change is inevitable, period. We can resist it and stay mired in old ways of thinking, old ways of acting, or we can work with the change. We can think in new ways, act in different ways. Sometimes, frankly, we find it incredibly difficult to deal with change. But not Joseph. He's been held up as a model of good parenting for centuries, and for very good reason. Dads, it seems to me, have an especially hard time dealing with changes, especially those changes that happen as their children grow up. We dads have a hard time letting go of the roles that we've played over the years and adopting the new role that is emerging. Such was the case with Marcia Tucker's dad. She and her father disagreed about many, many things. And most especially, they disagreed about her choice in boyfriends. He isn't right for you, argued her father. He's not ambitious enough. He won't go very far in life. But Marcia was in love. And so it was an ongoing argument. One day, as they were walking along a path in the woods near their vacation home in New Hampshire, they were embroiled in their usual argument. Dad was berating her, and she was refusing to enter into the conversation. She was mute. Suddenly, Marcia stubbed her toe, and as she looked at the path, she saw a dirty rock that seemed to be oddly shaped. She bent down. She picked it up. She dusted it off and discovered it was in the shape of a small heart. Without a word, she handed it to her father. Some 2 years later, the fellow her dad disapproved of was about to become her husband. It was a traditional sort of wedding, and her dad was scheduled to walk her down the aisle. As they stood together in the back of the church in the narthex, waiting for the wedding march to begin, Marcia's dad reached into his pocket and pulled out the stone, the heart-shaped stone. "I carry it all the time," he told his daughter, "to remind me of you and how very important our relationship is, no matter how much it changes." While I was upset with my dad for changing out those Christmas lights and refused to work with the change that first year, I came to really appreciate those lights in the years that followed, came to really love them, came to see them as the new tradition. But I'm not sure I've really learned that inherent lesson about change. For if I'm honest about it, I have to tell you that years later, long after Linda and I had had our own tree, one that had the white fairy lights on it, she suggested perhaps we could have colored lights. And I wouldn't budge. I guess I've still got a lot to learn, including the reality that change is inevitable, and one can resist it and be miserable, or one can learn how best to work with it. In small things like Christmas lights, as well as the big things like children growing up. And you won't find a better teacher, sisters and brothers, than Joseph, who shows not just us dads, but all of us, that learning to work with change can bring about all manner of good.